the piece that nobody is dealing with is like, okay, they're dealing with the concussion, whatever. Nobody deals with the fact that this person got a concussion from a car accident. Like this person had a trauma that was not resolved. And now their nervous system is acting like PTSD, like they have PTSD, and no one's actually talking about the PTSD part. No one's actually talking about the trauma of what that was like to sustain the accident. They're just talking about the effects of the accident. Oh, you have whiplash. Oh, you have this. Oh, you have that. And so that's a really interesting piece. And it's interesting because it really comes back down yet again to the autonomic nervous system and how the nervous system deals with being overwhelmed.
My name's Crystal, and I help people with brain injury find healing with food and nutrition. And I also like to speak to other healthcare providers who are working in the concussion community. And today, I have one of those conversations here for you. I was so happy and so excited to be able to speak with Shailla Vaidya. She's a medical doctor in Toronto and also a concussion warrior. We talked about going from healthcare provider to patient. And we also talked a lot about her work in concussion, where she's combining her roots of yoga and Ayurvedic medicine with Western medicine. It is so cool. We talked a lot about the importance of culture. We talked a lot about the nervous system and understanding the nervous system post-concussion and post-trauma, and how different types of trauma and aspects of trauma really affect our symptoms and our recovery going forward. We also got a snippet into Shailla's mindfulness that she, for the month of March, when we recorded this, had done some mindful March videos every single day. That is where we start, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
Because, you practice mindfulness. We're doing this at a time during Mindful March, and I've been following your Instagram with all your Mindful March videos. I don't know, is there any way you want to start this off in terms of like a breath or anything to get us here?
Yeah, sure. I don't have my bell, but I can pull one up on Insight Timer on my phone.
I have that same one.
All right, so I'm going to save that. We got 30 seconds. All right, so why don't we start with a meditation? I'm going to invite everyone to just kind of sit in your chair, or if you're standing, just inhale and roll your shoulders up. Exhale, roll them back. And just sink into your feet, sink into wherever you are, into your chair. And with the sound of the bell, take a breath into the body. As you exhale, release. We're just going to take a few breaths in and out here. Noticing how each breath nourishes your body. And each exhale allows you to release, let go. So that was 30 seconds. It's pretty short, but it still helps us focus and come into, I don't know, this connected conversation that we're going to have.
Yeah, awesome. I love, it takes so little time, and yet we are always, we tend to skip it or forget about it. But like the power of just that 30 seconds is so amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shailla, for talking with me today. We connected over the Pink Concussion group, and we found out we're both in Ontario. And you're known as the Yoga MD, which of course was super exciting for me to see. And when we first talked about like, you know, kind of both our views on how we kind of approach like health and concussion, it was the same. So this conversation just had to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So, first off, can you just share with us, like your journey? Like you were a doctor, you are a doctor, and you also have a concussion and have gone through that. So, yeah, like what kind of medicine did you practice, and how did you get to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because, I'm a multiple concussion survivor, as many people are. I've hit my head multiple times. I was a snowboarder. I fell off my bike when I was a kid. Like multiple things happened, and I always got better. And then I was actually practicing as an emergency room physician, and I went to this. I don't know what I was thinking, but I played in this hospital hockey tournament, and I'm not that good a player. Like I was really just learning, and kind of I had only played with women. And anyways, I signed up for this hockey tournament thinking it would be a fun thing to do, a charity tournament. And I remember we actually ended up having a women's line. And when I came off the line, the guys were coming on, and a guy just kind of just tapped my shoulder, like as you do, like when you're greeting your people as they're coming off and you're coming on. And I went, like, because I was wearing my hockey skates, not my figure skates, I went like I just rocked completely back and hit the back of my head. And I remember being like, oh my God. And luckily, there was another colleague of mine who was an emerge doc who was on the bench. This is probably about 2006 or 5, I can't remember. But from then my headaches got worse. And like in hindsight, I only know this in hindsight because I was talking to my neurologist and we were going through the history. And I was like, wait a second, I quit emergency medicine. Well, one, because it was getting crazy and it was like too much stress for me, but also because my headaches were getting much worse. And then, I hit my head again. Like I had a bike accident in 2018. Mm. And that's the one that really left me with persistent concussion symptoms. So I think we call it persistent post-concussion symptoms now.
Yes.
It keeps changing. It keeps changing because the science around this is changing, and they're studying more. And that's what's great about science, is we're learning so much more about it. And as patients, as we speak up, because I think it was like, oh, concussions, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, you should be better.
Yeah.
And in the past, I had gotten better. I may have had some residual stuff, but nothing that really stopped me from most of my life. And then this last one was a real eye opener into many things. One was being a patient, like being on that other side and needing care. And I was so, I couldn't believe how disjointed the system was. Like I knew the system was disjointed. I worked in the system, and I actually did a health management degree because I hated how the system worked, and I wanted to come back and improve the medical system and the care that we delivered. And I think I did that as a family doc. So I left Emerge, did family medicine. We started to do quality improvement initiatives, and my interest was really around chronic illness, and it ended up being around stress, and then because it was around stress, it ended up evolving into trauma-informed care because I found out about the adverse childhood experience score. And it was at that time that, and actually throughout my medical practice, that I'd been starting to incorporate yoga. So like all concussion people, I'm a little bit tangential. I'm going to go back a little bit and tell you a little bit more about how the yoga came into it, because I think it's a really important piece into what I'm doing now. And sometimes we say there's silver linings to negative experiences, and understanding trauma, the autonomic nervous system, how it affects our function was really incredibly helpful for me as I went through becoming somebody living with post-concussion symptoms, because I really could see it through that lens. When I was an emerge doc and a family doc, I was doing locums up in our First Nations community in the Moose Factory Zone, so Winnebago Hospital, and in the Sioux Lookout Zone Hospital. So working with First Nations, and I saw what had happened when a group of people had their culture stripped away from them, when they lost their culture, right? And they were sent to residential schools. There was a lot of trauma in those schools. Coming back and seeing the health effects of what that did to them, and being put on reserves and the isolation and all of that, was a real big eye opener for me for what actually contributed to being healthy. Instead of me always prescribing metformin for their diabetes, it was pretty clear that there was some other things that needed to happen, and that, you know, at best the drugs were a band-aid. And then when I came back from those experiences, I was working in a family medicine clinic in Mississauga, and there was a lot of South Asians. And so a lot of South Asian immigrants away from family, a lot of people dealing with stress as first-time immigrants, or first-generation immigrants. And I just started to use yoga in my practice because it was something that I felt was missing from their lifestyle that would have been in their lifestyle before. And it was very easy to kind of incorporate it because they knew about it. And, you know, talk therapy for people who are depressed just wasn't really helping. And a lot of people were coming for back pain. So it was just like an easy thing to start to incorporate. And then as my career moved on and I started to learn about adverse childhood experiences and the adverse childhood experience score, I realized that a lot of the people in my, even the non-South Asians that I was using yoga in my practice for, were people who had high amount of stress in childhood, and that kind of primed them. So that experience kind of led me to develop the Yoga MD, which at first was really based on stress and stress-related illnesses and burnout and helping professionals, because I certainly understood that too. Mm-hmm. And it was just as I was kind of ready to get those programs launched online and do a whole bunch of things that I hit my head and had to put a whole bunch of things on hold because of this concussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is amazing. Like you talked about that silver lining. Like, mm-hmm. I never thought I would be doing the work that I'm doing today, but now that I'm here, I can't imagine anything else. Yeah. And, you know, being in healthcare and having seen like how much healthcare professionals can sometimes martyr themselves for like the health of their clients or their patients. And when I saw that you were doing this like stress and burnout piece, I'm like, oh my God, I post concussion wasn't able to keep my job because things needed to change. It was already like super high stressful. And then you add the concussion and that just changes everything for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, you had said in there, there's so many things in there that I was like latching on to. And, you know, one of them being like going through the experience yourself as a healthcare provider, as a doctor, and then being the patient. I remember with, I guess, sort of the last big concussion I had, my family doc at the time, I went to see him and I was like, yeah, I got another concussion. And he was like, okay, well, you know what to do.
I know.
That was it. Like the education just hasn't been there. So so to see you like making all these links to not just like, okay, well, what does the person need, but bringing in the cultural aspect and bringing in like the nervous system and stress aspect is so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally and it was so natural to do because, you know, I had a pretty strong mindfulness practice. I'm a yoga teacher, so I have that, and a yoga therapist, so that's within me. But, you know, one thing that I was hearing so much is that people were saying, oh, they have so many mental health, concussion patients have so many mental health issues, and oh, their anxiety and all this stuff. And it was just like, it's not anxiety, it's my brain isn't working and my stress response is going off. And as I fix my brain, or as I work to rewire my brain and get better, that anxiety actually goes down, and the emotional dysregulation goes down as well. But the minute I get stressed, or the minute my bucket is full, it's like I'm overflowing. I've got nothing, right? So, and what we know about the autonomic nervous system now is that, we know that we go into that fight or flight response to help us, and then we also go into a rest and digest response. But when we get overwhelmed, we actually do what's called this dorsal dive, where we actually go into this shutdown response through the vagus nerve, where we actually literally shut down. Yeah. We literally can't do anything. And
I think the body's like, I've had enough. We're just turning everything off.
And the more you push, the more you fall into that, right? So it's like this piece of the autonomic nervous system that people are starting to talk about now, that I feel like, I was like, this is a huge gap in care, and I need to bring this to patients. And I was really lucky because, remember, I was doing the stress program. So I'd written a stress program on recovering from burnout. And the physiology of it is so similar because the common piece is the autonomic nervous system, it's so similar to what happens in concussion. And so, I was trying to come back to work after I hit my head, and I was like, what's going on? I'm crashing. My brain doesn't work. And in that time, I sent out an email saying, I've had to change my practice. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I need time off. And two of my patients who had been through some of the stress work that I'd done before, one was a psychologist and the other one was a yoga teacher. They both came in going, I just want to talk to somebody who gets what it feels like to be inside my body inside my head with this brain. Like, I know my brain isn't working, and it's so frustrating. And and I was so happy to talk to them because I was like, oh, you get this, like, because it's invisible, like nobody can see it. And yet it's such a huge thing that affects your whole life and how you function. And so from there, we started to build the Reconnect Concussion program. And I think I was talking to my assistant today, I think we're at our 2-year anniversary of that program.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Yay. And we're still I'm still trying to I'm always adding stuff. I'm learning new things. We're putting pieces together. We're still trying to get the platform right for how we're going to run it. But we do run it online for patients in Ontario. And our next group is actually full. But I'm hoping that by September, we'll have really ironed out a lot of the wrinkles and try to get it up and more functional so that we can get more people in. And of course, that also has to do with my own capacity, as many people who may be listening who live with concussion or persistent post-concussion symptoms understand that it's tough.
Yeah. It definitely is. I think we kind of talked about last time too, like the idea of setting deadlines for ourselves. And it's like great motivation, but also like the compassion around understanding that we might not meet our own set things. And I've seen that a lot, like building my program as well. But at the same time, taking the time and going along with, what my brain is asking of me has helped me to better build my program because I'm building it more for what people actually need. So I imagine it's the same for you as well.
Some people have jobs where you can't just go back to what it was. Like what is demanded of you is not there. And I'm struggling with that now because it's like, okay, now we have to vaccinate everybody. And I just got the email, okay, you need to do a 9-hour shift. If you're going to sign up, you need to do a 9-hour shift.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I can do a 9-hour shift of vaccinating and entering data. Like I don't.
Yeah.
I can do that, right? It's like,
oh my gosh.
I know. I'm like, I would love to, but I don't know that I can do that. So it kind of hurts. It's like, ugh.
Yeah. But it shows you, going back to your point about like how our system is just not set up. And when our system is set up like that, we're, whether you have a concussion or other reasons that make it difficult for you to do a 9-hour shift, we're excluding people from the healthcare system who bring that other point of view and that other perspective to make the system work better.
Yeah.
And cool. And so, speaking about your kind of yoga history, yoga has been part of your life for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm actually Indian, and yoga actually comes from India, which some people forget about. Like they forget that this is actually a part of my culture. But I grew up with it in a sense, like it was always kind of there. And it's something that I practiced. I remember practicing it in medical school. I remember practicing just as something that was just kind of done around me. And I tried to hold on to that practice in residency because I think it was just, I didn't know the science of why it was working at the time, but I knew how it made me feel. Yeah. And, what we know now is we have so much more research around how mindfulness works. And, we call it mindfulness, but it's rooted in yoga. Yeah. And, we talk about compassion, also rooted in yoga and in Buddhist practices. But Buddhist practices also use yoga. So yoga is one of the 6 or 7 darshans which are like philosophies I don't know if philosophy is the right word, but aspects of Indian culture or of Indian education, or Vedic or even Sankhya, I would say. So when we can see that when we look at the Greeks, right? Because, Greek mythology, and then there's Greek Hippocrates and Greek medicine and Greek philosophy and Greek,
Okay.
so we can, and so India is like that too, as is many cultures.
Yeah.
And so yoga is one of those things. And when I when I was practicing family medicine and started to use yoga in my practice, and then one of my patients said, "Hey, this is mindfulness." And I looked at that time, I think it was like 2010, and I looked up what mindfulness was, because I was like, "What's mindfulness? I've never heard of it." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is just yoga with another name." And it was studied, and of course, John Kabat-Zinn, who was one of the people who popularized mindfulness, was a yoga teacher, and so. He couldn't call it yoga at the time. Neither could Dr. Herbert Benson, who studied the relaxation response, because they need to get funding, and they knew that maybe if they called it yoga, it wouldn't be as acceptable. But they know where this comes from. And it's so great to see that people have been researching these techniques, and that we can show that it changes the brain, it fosters neuroplasticity, it helps us with our stress response, it works on a genetic and physiological level to help us even decrease the effects of aging. There's so many things that these practices do that are so helpful, and I get so excited and passionate about. And then to apply it to concussion, I mean, it's just this perfect piece of the puzzle, I feel. And I'm trying to get the other people in the concussion community to kind of go, "Hey, this is important." And they're like, "Yeah, maybe." But what's so interesting is now some of the concussion research, and I don't know if you follow Dr. John Leddy, who works at the University of Buffalo. Okay. He might be a really great person to have on your podcast. I don't know. He's the nicest guy. And he was the guy who studied subthreshold exercise. So how to increase your cardiac.
Yeah. The treadmill test to find out where you have symptoms. I've done that test twice. Yeah. The last time I did it, my threshold was so much higher. It was great to see that improvement. But yeah, that is that's almost like a standard now in certain clinics. Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, in many clinics they have it now, and they're starting to do it with patients. So that's fantastic, because I think so many of us starting off, it's like, oh my God, I can't even many of us hit our heads during some kind of athletic activity or some kind of sport activity, or maybe just in any kind of activity, but we could walk and we could ride a bike or we could swim, or there's things we used to be able to do at a certain level. And then when you get the concussion, you can't exert yourself that much without shutting down. It's like, I'm so exhausted. So Dr. Leddy's research, there's one paper he did in 2018. I just saw him present this at the UHN, the Canadian Concussion Center online conference. And he actually shows, he's like, this is the athlete and we're stressing them. And he's like, but if they do too much, their heart rate drops and their blood pressure drops and all this stuff happens. And to me, that's just like the autonomic dorsal dive, where we get overwhelmed and we just shut down as a method of energy conservation. Our body actually does that to conserve energy and to protect us. And he's like, it looks like there's some autonomic dysfunction in the brainstem. And I'm like, this is just what happens. I know. This is happens in stress response, right? And this is PTSD. This happens all the time. People get overwhelmed. Boom, they shut down. So we can see it in other things. So I'm so excited. Now, I can't say that's exactly what this was showing, but from my perspective, understanding the autonomic nervous system and what it does when it goes down to that, when it shuts down, I could see that clear pattern that this is exactly what's happening. So
like yoga in concussion. I mean, from my own personal experience, what a savior it was to have that and learning mindfulness more in detail. And I know I was only introduced to mindfulness during my recovery. And I remember when I first talked about it with someone else, and I was like, oh, I'm doing this thing. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called mindfulness. And they kind of rolled their eyes and were like, oh yeah, I hear about it all the time, because it's become this pop kind of culture, kind of crunchy thing. And I was like, this is my therapy. I don't understand why. And so anyways, I feel like, there's the sort of pop culture kind of mindfulness, but then there's, realizing where its roots come from. And just how therapeutic that is. I loved when you were saying how, you noticed in your patient population, of like, people from South Asia, that there was something missing. And that missing piece was culture, was like
Yeah.
their own culture. And I find, a number of people come to me and they're like, I've had people from different cultures come to me and say, oh, like, here's my cultural food. Is it okay for me to have? And
Yeah.
that to me is devastating,
Mm-hmm.
that in our society, that's what's led to believe, is that somehow a person's like cultural food could be wrong. And I'm like, I'm never gonna say someone's food is like not right, like unless they're allergic or whatnot. But
Yeah.
like, it's because the connection between food and culture is going to be so much more healing than just like any food list out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you recognize that, because I don't know if many people in the healthcare professions really do recognize that as much, but I think like as a dietitian, it must become so clear, because everybody's coming for whatever reasons. And for me, prior to doing this work, it was a lot of chronic illnesses, a lot of diabetes. It was a lot of, this is what you should be eating. And it's really based on the American diet, which we then say is the standard American diet, the SAD diet. And we're trying to shift it to the Mediterranean diet. But then, if you look at somebody who's Chinese background, or for me, South Asian background, or even of African descent, they may eat differently. And it's those traditional foods that their grandparents ate, that are so important. And so much of that culture is being lost just with westernization. Like all around the world, everybody's losing their traditional diet, so it's so important to recognize that and to honor that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that, one of the questions I had come to you with, was like a word I had heard, but then I'd actually, kind of saw you make a post about, was like Ayurveda.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of heard that term thrown around. And then I'm like, well, Shailla probably knows what it actually is. So, so yeah, do you mind sharing like, what that is and like how that's helpful and your experience with it?
Yeah, so Ayurveda is like it's kind of, again, it's another kind of darshan. It's of Indian philosophy or Indian culture. Uh, it's the science of life is essentially what it means, and it's the wellness practices. So these are the health practices that we as a culture used to used to practice. And then if something was wrong, it was often thought of an imbalance in the lifestyle, and that the idea was to bring yourself back to the centered state. Now, of course, there's things like cancer and other larger medical issues that I'm not necessarily talking about, but I'm talking about a lot of the lifestyle illnesses that we have and the stress that we have and how we express that. And what Ayurveda does, it kind of puts everybody into a phenotype. And it asks you kind of to look at your phenotype and then understand the life. Once you kind of understand that, these are the lifestyle factors that may throw you off. And when you get thrown off, this might be how you react. And if you react this way, then these are the things you should do to balance that, or to bring yourself back to that centered state where you're not so thrown off. You're not affected as much by stress or by lifestyle changes or whatever else is happening.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful for me because, and they are studying it more, especially in India. They're going back to studying, like, these were practices that were all shamed by the British under colonization. So much like our First Nations in Canada here and in North America had their culture stripped, India was also colonized, and most recently by the British. And yoga was, there's a lot of religious practices that were made illegal. Yoga, Ayurveda, a lot of that was shamed, right? That these are poo-poo, they're not good, they're not wise, or whatever, British know best, or some kind of thing, right? Like that the Western idea is the better thing, we should all adapt to that. And a lot was lost because as India westernized, of course, they're growing, their economy is growing, there's so many great things, but some of the old practices that were so important to health were lost. And so bringing it back is so important. So for me, Ayurveda, I started to learn about it. Well, one, I learned about it in my household because my mother would cook based on, what was what we were feeling that day, right? Like, so if you were,
awesome.
if you were very anxious, or, well, I mean, and God bless her, and I probably didn't eat half of it, so I can't say it was perfect, you know, because I was just like, oh, my friends aren't eating that. I don't want to eat this food. Like, you get, you know, you do feel shame around your culture when you're other. But I hope I'm bringing that back. And it was a different time. It was the 70s and early 80s. So it was a while ago, but yeah, learning about that, and then understanding that there's an actual science behind it, or there's a method and a methodology behind it. So much like in Chinese medicine, they looked at elements. So they looked at the element of fire, water, earth, air, and ether. And they combined a few of those things. So what are the qualities of fire, right? It's hot, it's burning, it's strong, it gives light. There's so many things that each element kind of has. Remember, it's all metaphor. And when you're translating knowledge, in many indigenous cultures, it was translated through metaphor because that was something people could understand. And so fire, water is flowing, it's grounding, it's wet. Like, there's so many things with water. Earth, grounding, heavy, that kind of thing. And then air and ether is just kind of like spacious. And, you know, when it's out of balance, it can be all over the place, but when it's in balance, it may be creative, and it may give you space to do things. So they use those elements, and then they kind of put them into what are called doshas. And dosha is really the phenotype. So pitta is kind of like leadership. And it's really, I think it's fire and water together. And you think of leaderships, when it's balanced, you may think of anger, and when it's unbalanced, right? Kapha, you think of like calm and cool, because it's earth and water when it's balanced. But when it's unbalanced, it may be heavy and I don't want to say lazy, but like yeah, kind of
hard to motivate.
Hard to motivate, yeah.
Yes.
And that's a better word, because I think lazy has a lot of negative connotations.
Yeah.
And when we think of hard to motivate, we may actually even think more of what's happening to this person when their autonomic nervous system is shutting down. Right. So I can't even believe I used the word lazy, because I actually don't like it that way at all.
Well, that's just how pervasive that word is, like, in our culture, and gets used. I hear it in my clients all the time, and I'm like, it's just hard to motivate. There's barriers, there's things going on that are outside of your control. And we're just trying to navigate that. So cool. So I like that, like earth and water, what happens when it's out of balance. It's it's harder to move. Fire, when it's out of balance, it's anger. And there's another one?
The third one is vata. Vata is I think it's air and ether. I might be, I should have looked this up before. My concussion brain, I'm like, it's air and, like, I want to say ether, but isn't ether air? Like, it's a combination of those two. And it tends to be creative when it's balanced, but it tends to be anxious when it's unbalanced, right? Like stressed and anxious, and the way it expresses that. So if somebody who is pitta gets stressed, they may get angry and fight. But somebody who is vata gets stressed, they may get anxious and ungrounding. And somebody who's kapha, who is stressed, may shut down, right? Like they just may shut down and withdraw. So based on those types of doshas and the combinations of the two, when something is out of balance, then there's like lists of foods you should eat, lists of activities you should do, how you should observe to bring yourself like life, so you can bring yourself back into balance. So for instance, if you're very vata, then which is
the air one.
The air one, right?
Yes.
The air one. That part is true. If you're, eating a lot of cold or uncooked foods, it may create more digestive issues. Whereas, if you're vata and you're anxious, it's nice to have warm, comforting foods to aid digestion and to kind of soothe the system. So that's how it balances itself out. And then it looks at, in Ayurveda, there's also 6 tastes. There's sweet, salty, bitter, pungent, astringent, which is drying. And I always forget the 6th one. Sweet, salty, bitter, pungent, drying. Astringent? Did I say astringent?
You did. Sour? Wait.
Sour. Yeah, sour. Sour is sour. Sorry. I get like, I'm like a 90% person or an 80% person. I get like 80% right. And then it's 20% my brain is like, I always used to joke that before I hit my head that I was like an A- person. I mean, you couldn't do that in medicine. Obviously that changed when I became a doctor, because you had to you had to get everything. But now I just kind of laugh. I'm like, I got most of it, right? So so sour. And so it looks at, you want to balance all those tastes in a meal. Mm-hmm. That's how you kind of turn off the appetite, or that's how you satisfy the appetite. But then the different foods that you take, or different foods have different qualities, and they will either promote the dosha or throw the dosha off. So they're given a plus or minus. So they'll either balance the dosha, or they'll disturb the dosha. So yeah, and people are like, oh, I can eat this, but I can't eat that. And it's not that. It's more, what is the best foods, and it's all healthy foods that you can eat. So you're not going to look at a list of Ayurvedic foods and see like French fries and fish and chips. Like, you're just not going to see junk food on the list.
Yeah. Though it's okay to have. It's just okay not part of the practice.
Yeah. And so it's not restricting food as much as it's looking at what's the best food for you to have right now to bring your dosha back into balance. And it's very important to eat in season as well. So it's really listening to the seasons, listening to your body, and balancing it that way. And that's something that all of us have really lost in this modern world, where we're so disconnected from food and our feeling.
I was going to say there's so much in there that's connected with mindfulness and observing like your own state, and then observing the environment you're in. And when, I talk about mindful eating, I have people go, oh, mindful eating. No, I don't really want to do that. And, I ask them kind of like, well, what's your impression of mindful eating? Because it's not sitting in a dark room eating a carrot. That's not what it is. But the idea of like the doshas of being like, well, we all kind of flow in and out of this state. We all get unbalanced. Yeah. So it's about how do you just make decisions and food choices that help you feel more balanced or centered. And I love that, because it's, we're not ever always going to be like perfectly balanced.
Right.
So to notice that's really cool.
Yeah, so that's what Ayurveda is about, and it's so fascinating to apply it, because most of us are a mix of some things, but from a medical perspective, when I look at somebody and they're completely kapha, like, so that's one of the doshas, and it's imbalance, it's like, oh, this is so clear to me what this is and how to bring it back in. And you can get cookbooks that actually explain the methods, and then what to choose and what to avoid. So it's again, sometimes when we get into restrictive diets, people feel so restricted, but they feel like, oh, I'm doing something. I'm taking this on, I'm putting my effort into this kind of diet, but they never really stick with it. And this is kind of like something that I think it's bigger than that diet. It's understanding yourself and understanding what's happening around you, so you can make choices that are healthy for you in that moment.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, in terms of how we define diet in kind of our Western culture, I wouldn't call this a diet, because restrictive diets so often fail. And the reason is because the moment you place restrictions on yourself and you have these very hard food rules, it's like, one, the rules might not be right for you, right? It could be something that's completely against what your body actually wants and needs. Yeah. And then two, the moment you have that tunnel vision, or just like, I can't have this, well, that's what your brain now wants, is the thing that you've said that you absolutely cannot have. Yeah. And so then it, I see it, lead into the cycle of where, someone's so restrictive, and then they may not be getting all of the different kind of flavors to satisfy their appetite. So then they're wanting more, and then it's harder to stick with it. And then they eat a lot more, and they're like, oh, why they do that? They try again, and it gets worse and worse and worse, as opposed to being like, well, okay, food, there's like different, guiding posts. And like, if I listen to myself, and if I kind of listen to my environment, and have like a guide with that, then I can make the choice I feel is best for me in any given moment.
Right. Ayurveda gives you a way to apply something to yourself, like to understand yourself. Here's the system. For a lot of my patients, when we work through it, and of course, when I do it as a program, I have all the things explained. So I'm not like, wait a second, what is that? But I have it all explained. It's like concussion brain in the afternoon when we're doing this. And so it actually gives them an understanding and taking away that there are bad foods, like that something is bad for you or something is good for you, and you should feel shame and guilt if you consume something. And this is where, that shame and guilt, that plays so heavy with people who are recovering from concussion for so many reasons around, one, not being able to perform the way they used to, and now all of a sudden their body's stressed out because of the concussion and they're gaining weight and they don't know why. And there's so many things that are happening physiologically that for some reason, when it comes to food, we've learned to shame ourselves around it. Like, oh, I must be gaining weight because I'm eating the wrong things, or it must be something I'm doing, as opposed to this is the physiology of what happens post-concussion as the body is trying to reset itself, or as the brain is injured and the stress response is going off. And trying to come back to that with the compassion piece, like the self-compassion piece, which, to me is so huge in getting better from compassion, is instead of having the voice in the head saying this is bad or this is not good or you're not good, that ego defense, but like turning that around and practicing self-compassion and saying, this is really hard for me right now and I'm doing the best I can. And just even taking those moments to breathe in mindfully, because the practice of mindfulness is so important to the practice of self-compassion, and recognizing that as people with concussion living with persistent symptoms, this is what we go through, and it's suffering, and it's part of something that we all share, and it connects us to each other, right? And I'm not alone in this, even though maybe the people who I see medically might not understand me, or my family or my friends might not understand me. There are people who get what I'm going through, and it's other people going through the same experience. And that's, I think, what is so important in groups in the groups that you're running and the groups that I'm running, and what Pink Concussions is doing, but bringing people together to say, hey, we're not alone in this. And these are our common experiences.
It's so like, like you were saying, there's so much like shame and guilt around food. And then on top of that, I see a lot of people where, post-concussion, maybe you can't work, you can't do your activities, you can't do all the things you normally could. And so I see a lot of us, and it's kind of natural to then turn that kind of control towards food. And that's where like the guilt and the shame comes up, because, you can't like aiming for this perfectionistic control of food, which does not exist and is not helpful. And so that compassion piece is so key. Ever since I like shifted how I work, like 2 years ago, and I'm never going back. Well, never going back. But where I'm like, okay, now that I can do my own thing, like when I work with people, I'm like, this is a slow burn. We're gonna dig deep, and people start to realize that, it's not a food list they need, but like, oh wow, I never realized that, how I eat is from like how I feel about myself, or or whatnot. Anyways, so like that compassion piece for food is so critical for people to be able to like be free to make the choices that are right for them. And I feel like the other piece of this that's so critical post-concussion is understanding trauma-informed care, which is something you brought up right at the top in one of the tangents. Sorry. But that's awesome. I'm so used to it because I do it myself. It's like I can almost see where I can visualize it because I do it so often. But like the importance of trauma-informed care, of trauma being that such a difficult time in your life where you're scraping at anything to be able to cope, and sometimes that's food, sometimes that's okay. But for you, how do you think of trauma-informed care?
I mean, it's such a huge topic, and I feel like I'm bringing so many different pieces to what trauma is. And, at the end of the day, it's something bad has happened to us and we've not been able to recover, or it's holding us back from recovery. And it's funny because, I start off in emergency medicine, and if you ask me what trauma was then, I would say, oh, somebody in a car accident came into the the ambulance bay, the trauma bay, and we'd resuscitate them, and that's trauma, like, and I can deal with it, and I can intubate and get their blood pressure up and all these things. But there's such a huge piece of, there's mental trauma as well. That something terrible happened to us and we weren't able to get to safety within the 4 hours that our brain actually needs to process the trauma. And maybe the trauma, and we know that now, right? That the nervous system has to come back down. We have to return to safety. The hormones have to go down, in particular adrenaline and cortisol, so the traumatic memory can go from the right side of the brain to the left side of the brain to, I'm hoping that it's not left to the right, maybe left to right, but I think it's right to left. But anyway, but for the memory process to transition to become a process memory. Otherwise, it stays in pieces, right? And I think what concussion did for me, in terms of this other silver lining, was it really made me put that piece of the puzzle together. Because like, oh yeah, I know about concussion. I was in emerg shock. I dealt with this all the time. Yeah. So much has changed since when I was in emerg shock and what we used to tell people to do compared to now. But the piece that nobody is dealing with is like, okay, they're dealing with the concussion, whatever. Nobody deals with the fact that this person got a concussion from a car accident. Like, this person had a trauma that was not resolved, and now their nervous system is acting like PTSD, like they have PTSD, and no one's actually talking about the PTSD part. No one's actually talking about the trauma of what that was like to sustain the accident. They're just talking about the effects of the accident. Oh, you have whiplash. Oh, you have this. Oh, you have that. Yeah. And so that's a really interesting piece. And it's interesting because it really comes back down yet again to the autonomic nervous system and how the nervous system deals with being overwhelmed. And after the brain has been injured, like our ability to withstand that next thing, even just process information in the brain, like our ability for our brain to connect and process what's happening, and for the signals coming in from the vestibular system and the ocular system, and all of that stuff gets thrown off. So that's throwing off our autonomic nervous system. Then there may be the more, so that might be the somatic stuff. And then there might be the more psyche stuff, which is, I didn't get a chance to complete the trauma. I didn't get a chance to come back to safety. Or maybe I did, but I was still in shock, right? Because we were in shock for a period of time. And so when I see people, I often get their story and I can hear where they get stuck. And although I don't focus completely on PTSD in the practice, I do acknowledge it. And what we know, and like, so the practices can help deal with that. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't have a magic wand, but I'm hoping from what I'm hearing that it's helping. Yeah. But then there's complex trauma, which is what happens when you're a kid or under the age of 18, where you've had multiple stressors. And many of us, and many people with chronic illnesses, are people who have high, what's called adverse childhood experience scores. They've had high adversity in childhood. Their nervous system's primed under stress. And they've kind of suppressed it and moved forward and got on with their life. And then they have this major life event, such as a concussion, and everything comes up because they no longer even have the opportunity to hold it all down anymore. Yeah. Now it's like, oh my gosh, not only do I have to get better from concussion, but I have to heal everything now. I can't just heal my head and move forward. I actually have to heal all this baggage that I've just been dragging with me, because I don't have the energy to keep dragging it.
For me, one of the things that I am seeing more and more is how the stress and the trauma is impacting a person's ability to eat and what it's bringing up and leading to that control of food. And then also like, very difficult thoughts and emotions towards food. So now like trauma-informed care is super important to me because I know I'm in a position to help prevent like an eating disorder, right? Because we know that there's like a link to trauma there. And I've even had, just going back to kind of like how our healthcare kind of system works and like what gets identified and what doesn't. I see people who come to me and since like day one of their concussion, they've had nausea, maybe vomiting, and like zero appetite, and they've lost a ton of weight. And they've maybe seen other professionals in that time, but nobody has like brought up, oh, like you're not eating or you can't eat. That's a problem, like why, because it's harder, like it's linked to so many deeper things. And anyways, that's just my own plug of I refer to a dietitian. But
Yeah.
but like noticing these pieces and like helping people out with each of them.
Yeah. And yes. And I
Yes,
feel
totally.
like the concussion community is starting to turn that way. Like they're going, oh, we're providing care, but we're not actually providing what the concussion people need. And I know Dr. Martin Osmond, who is in Ottawa at CHEO, is starting to do a survey to ask people, what is it you actually need from us, and what are we providing, to see if we can do a better matchup. And then I haven't filled out the survey yet, but I think I don't think we're quite there yet, but
Yeah.
to be able to put those together and to be able to say it's not just one thing, or go to the dietitian, she's going to tell you what to eat and give you a food diary. Like when you're talking about trauma informed care, and what you're doing, what I'm seeing you're doing is that more holistic practice of this is like understanding who you are, or who this person is, and how do we help them eat better and live better. And that's kind of how I'm trying to do it too. Like, it's not just one thing. I think what I'm lucky about with yoga is that it includes the breath and the movement and the meditation piece that actually addresses many different problems with one solution. And that's something. I mean, I know you stand with me when I feel like we just need to burn our system down and start from scratch, because whatever we're doing right now, like, and a lot of great people are working really hard in the system, but they're also burnt out, right? So, I mean, clearly it needs to come down, and we need to do other things. And it's really hard to do that. And especially when there's like so many different players and stakeholders and how to get that done. It's very frustrating, but I really have faith in the next generation. Like I'm Generation X, and I feel like we kind of got the short end of the stick, but we also couldn't make change because there was just so many people above us that learned in a certain way, and that were doing things a certain way, that when we came through with our ideas of new technology, it was just like, this is, but the millennials, I find, are such a big generation, and the technology is more ripe, that I feel like that is going to instigate change. And then Gen Z behind, they're already doing things so differently. So I do have faith that the system will change. Because I know in my own profession, everybody's burning out. Like, it's like, this is crazy.
Well,
so this can't happen.
It's not sustainable, right?
No.
So it's either going to burn to the ground, or it's got to change before that happens.
Yeah. And I don't know what's going to happen first, but my choice is to do things the way I think is more sustainable for me as a provider. And where I found so much more joy in what I do through the group visits, the group medical visits, and doing, being able to apply yoga. And if that gets delisted because I'm a family doctor and they kind of think that's mental health and that should be done by someone else, then that'll be too bad. But I really love what it is. Like, I love doing it this way. So
no, that's exactly. Like, yes. What kinds of things are you hearing from people in your group? I know I've talked to like one or two of them, and they're like, oh, Shailla's amazing.
It's not just me. Like, it's I think the thing is, it's the power of the connection, right? Like, it's the power of them all being in a group together, going, oh my God, I'm not the only one going through this. And all of them know what it's like to have friends who don't get it, and family who don't get it, and job places, like employers that don't get it. And they're so able to support each other. And then, that is the piece that I think it's not really do with me. I mean, it's helpful that I've also had a concussion, so I can relate to them and I can understand. And, some days I show up and it's a migraine day for me, and I'm like, all right, this is what we're doing today. And they can take the ball as well. It doesn't happen often. We do have a structure, like, But,
well, no, like having your experience, like just like myself, we create the environment that is that like not only allows for that group connection to happen, but is also like considerate of the issues that people with concussions have. So it makes it like accessible, right?
And then what you put out there is relatable. Like, I mean, I think when I first connected with you, it was on Pink Concussions, and you were talking about meal planning, and I was like, oh my God, it's this. Like, I know what I can eat. I just don't have the energy to cut up the vegetables and cook, like that's where the struggle is in terms of nutrition. So how do we make that process better? So, kudos to you for doing this. I'm so glad that our models were so similar and that, that this can work.
No, I often say like the wisdom of the group is far greater than any one person. And like, just, like you said, seeing people who are going through the same thing, realizing you're not alone. And then with food too, be like, I'm not the only one who's nauseous all the time, or I'm not the only one burning stuff on my stove weekly.
Oh my God.
So many times.
Or adding too much of this, or forgetting, like, cause like, did I add that in there? I don't know. And I think that's something that we can all just relate to. And then there's other people like, oh, that happens to me all the time. And I was like, no, it's different. It's so different. Like I forget things once in a while too, but right now my brain is not like, one of the things I had issues with was speech and writing. So I remember like putting Facebook text up, sorry, it's starting to come out. And I would read it. It would look perfectly fine through my head. And then I'd post it and somebody would like, oh my God, you got to proofread this. And it was total jumble. Like it wasn't even the letters of any kind of words,
Oh my gosh.
There's a disconnect. There was anyway, it's a bit better now, but it still happens. There's a disconnect in my brain that got much worse. Like, cause everybody can read something and it looks like it says one thing, cause that's what the narrative you have in your mind. But it's just a different level, right? And when you're going through it, it's nice to know other people are too, and that get it.
I sometimes say to people and they're like, oh, that happens to me too. And I don't even have a brain injury. I'm just like, it's annoying to you, but it's debilitating to me. So like, calm down.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to quote you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Amazing. Cool. Well, Shailla, is there like any like last words or like message that you want to like get out to the masses? Here's your platform.
Well, the platform is that there's so much changing in concussion care, and seek out the people who get it. Like Google concussion care, Google, like find people on Instagram. There's so many people and so many great people like you doing registered dietitian. There's PTs, vestibular physiotherapists out there. There's so many people who are trying to improve care and change and recognize, and it's not to put down your family doctor, your other healthcare providers. They might not be the most up to date on some things because it's just changing so quickly. And I know for me, I'm trying to do my best to educate the medical community. I'm sure you're doing the same with dietitians. Physiotherapists are also doing the same, that we have to get the message out there so that people know, a couple things, lots is changing. Two, that women aren't necessarily studied. So all the evidence that we have is really on young men and how they get better. And we're not looking at older men. We're not looking at older women. And with that comes comorbidity. So, and that's really important to know, because especially if you are dealing with an insurance company that says, hey, you should be better by now. Well, maybe you're not. This may take a little longer. Like, as you said, it's a slow burn. Maybe you'll be better in a year, maybe 2 years. It may take 5 years. The brain is slow to change, but it can change. So also having the hope that you can get better, that if you just stick with it, slow down. We got to slow down to speed up. And I think that's the hardest thing, even for me, is just slow down. And eventually this will, eventually you'll get better, but there is a method. There's a method to get yourself better, and there's things that you can do.
I'm going to quote you on, you got to slow down to speed up, because that is like put that on a poster on my wall somewhere. That's brilliant. Awesome. Cool. Mm-hmm. Well, where can people find you? And I'll put all the links in the place where there are links.
Thank you. I'm on Instagram at the yoga.md, because somebody else has the yoga MD. I don't know, but they're not doctors, but the yoga.md. And if you put the yoga in, it'll come up.
Yes.
On Facebook, I'm the yoga MD. On LinkedIn, I'm under Shailla Vaidya and the Yoga MD. And what we're trying to launch, we're going to launch it soon. I don't know how soon, but sometime this year, we're going to launch the Reconnect Concussion Program on Instagram. So we already have an account under Reconnect Concussion,
nice.
but we haven't posted anything yet, but this will go up hopefully on that. Yeah, we're going to launch its own website. So I'm going to try to do some things with that.
Nice.
Just so that people have access to the clinical program. And then maybe we can study it and we can train other people to do it. Because obviously it's bigger than me. And I would love to see just people being able to partake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it too. Let's make it happen.
We will. We'll make it happen.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And let's keep in touch. We're obviously going to keep
we're going to keep in touch. Yeah. But it was great to talk to you. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome.
Bye.